over the years, I've had a kind of complex relationship with React Router. In a lot of ways, I owe it so much for my success. I spent a lot of time at Twitch using it to architect our routes and our systems for making great experiences for our users. And it was a huge part of my day-to-day work, especially when I was working on internal tools. And there's a lot of things it did great. On the other hand, query params. I could literally sit here and rant so long about the way that it's misused terms and caused us to think about search params wrong. And I'm not going to do that, though, because today is not about my personal past frustrations with React Router or its previous lack of type safety or its lack of real ways to do server rendering, because a lot, but not all of these problems have been fixed. And I genuinely think React Router v7 is one of the most important releases in React history, because this is the path for the average React dev to finally get the benefits of server components and much more. And this includes, but isn't limited to, the effective murder of Remix and scrapping it for parts to bring the best things into React Router, with hopes of Remix v2 happening in the future. There's a lot to talk about here, and I'm so excited to cover it all. But first, we have to pay some bills, so listen to our sponsor real fast. Epic React by Kent C. Dodds. Today's sponsor is a tutorial, and I know that that's not usually my thing, but I promise this one is even more different than me. First off, Kent Dodds made it. He's a legend. He's a huge part of how I learned React, and he's going to help you get really, really good at it. Everything new for React 19 and everything you ever had to learn before, it doesn't matter if you're new to React or you've used it for years, there's cool stuff here. But this isn't your usual tutorial. It's not like a page you go through and copy paste code it from, nor is it some built-in crappy editor in your browser. When you get started, you actually clone a repo and run it locally in your editor, and the whole workshop is done through localhost, through that code base you're running on your system. And it's not like you're alone in this either. You can see all the other people who are currently doing these lessons with you, as well as join Discord and chat with them, ask them questions, ask them how they're solving things. All the code that is for the workshop is in my editor, so I'm using my tools of choice. I don't have to learn a bunch of weird new janky stuff. It's very, very different. And I am blown away with the quality of what Kent has created here. It feels much more like a real work environment where we're pushing each other to learn instead of the usual wall of text telling me how I should do the thing. By the way, if you work at a company that uses React, you probably shouldn't pay for this course yourself. Get them to pay for it for you. Kent even wrote a letter that you can copy paste to your boss asking them for it. We'll be sure to link this in the description too. So what are you waiting for? Level up your React skills today with Epic React. Check them out now at soydev.link/epicreact. Let's dive in. Today, we're happy to announce the stable release of React Router v7. v7 brings everything you love about Remix back into React Router proper. We encourage all Remix v2 users upgrade to React Router v7. I misspoke earlier. Remix v3 is what we're waiting for, not v2. Regardless, if you're on Remix right now, you should probably just be using React Router. It's funny they call that out. In the future of Remix is going to be something very, very different. For the majority of the React ecosystem that's been around for the last 10 years, we believe React Router v7 will be the smoothest way to bridge the gap between React 18 and 19. I, as someone who's known for not loving Remix and having a lot of gripes with React Router, I fully agree with this statement. I couldn't be more on board, and I am very, very hyped that React Router recognizes the important role it has as the routing methodology that most React apps use today. Yes, React Router is still used by the majority of React apps. Awesome to see them acknowledge that and be the path to bring the best things from the new React building to every other code base using React. I'll be realistic here. There is no world in which Twitch could have realistically moved to Next.js after all of the work that's gone into the current website. This lets the benefits of React 19 reach the Twitch code base and other giant ones like it. So what does upgrading look like? For v6 users, the release brings a wealth of features from Remix back into Router in the form of framework mode. We'll take a look at that in a bit. In addition to the handful of components and hooks that you already use, you now have access to a compiler with broad support for dependencies based on Vite, server rendering, bundle splitting and optimization, vastly improved type safety, a world-class development environment with HMR, and much more. You can read the v6 upgrade guide for more information on how we've made the upgrade path as smooth as possible for you and what you have to look forward to in v7. Something I want to check in here is to see how much they help you get off of Webpack and onto Vite. The word Vite does not appear on this page, so they do not. This is just about how you actually integrate React Router in your TypeScript code, not how you do any of the bundling stuff. They also have some help for you Remix users if you want to move off and upgrade to the latest, which is React Router v7. Kind of weird that they wrote a guide on how to get off of Remix, but they're being realistic about this. React Router is the right place for these wins to go, even if it means killing their framework. I think I need to do a timeline at some point, the crazy history of Remix. It started as a paid template for server rendering your React and React Router applications, moved to a framework that you had to pay for a license for, moved to an open source framework that was free, and then got killed in order to make React Router better. It's a wild history, and it's worth a video of its own, but we're not focused on that. We're focused on React Router v7. Let me know in the comments if a full breakdown of how we got to Remix and then to here is something you're interested in. But if you're not one of those people maintaining an old app, what does this mean for new apps? Well, if you're starting a new app with React Router, you have a choice. Do you want to use React Router just as a library and bring the rest of the pieces yourself? Or do you want a full framework similar to Remix? It really depends on how much of your stack you'd like to invent yourself and how much leverage you'd like to get out of React Router. Oh, bars. Thank you. This is a problem I have with Next. Next does so many things really well, and there's a few things it does that I absolutely hate. With Pages Router, it was relatively easy to get out of those things and use Next as like a pre-rendering Webpack config to just generate routes for you and then do everything else your own way. Remix was a little heavier with like, here is how you do things. And if you don't like doing it their way, you're kind of SOL. Next.js App Router leans into that direction. The primitives are much more minimal and composable, which makes me happy, and I find myself wanting to reach for other things less. But the DIY path isn't as valid and really viable in the new way of building with Next. Seeing them take this opportunity to make React Router the most modular solution, that is really cool to see. And I would normally say it's unrealistic, but after seeing how quick they moved Remix from being its own crazy pile of ES build configs to a based on Vite plugin blew me away. And yes, the devs who did this are fucking wizards. But if the wizards could do that quickly, now we have the source code that we can reference, and we can now ourselves build something way better for our specific needs using all of the resources and efforts they've put in to build their own parts. So you can use the ones you like, you can ignore the ones you don't, and you can build your own solution. This is not for everyone, to be clear. If you're watching this trying to figure out what stack to use for your next project and you're confused and scared between different options, I still think you should probably just use Next right now. It's a really good choice if you don't know what choice to make, and there are solutions to the problems you'll run into. But if you're working on a big code base with a lot of people with different opinions and various problems, like I had to do in enterprise when I was working at Twitch and Amazon, this level of control is essential, and it will make your life so much better when you need to opt out of some decision the framework made that makes your life harder. This is awesome for the React apps the majority of React engineers are working on. It's not the best for the majority of apps, but for the apps that have the most contributors, that make the most money, that are paying your salaries, this is a huge, huge win. They have two different guides for getting started. You can use it as a framework with Create React Router and as a library using Create Vite. All our templates come with built-in deployment pipelines as well, whether you're using Docker and hosting on a VPS or you're deploying to a cloud like Cloudflare Workers. Also, I know that it already supports Vercel. I haven't double-checked, but I know it already supports Vercel, as well as Netlify and all those other providers. They've been pretty good about that historically. I want to play. I'm so happy the CLIs for all these things have gotten so much better. They were garbage when Create T3 app started, and I think we inadvertently pushed the whole industry to care more, which is something I think is really cool. Interesting, it spits out 3 different Docker files if you want to use bun or pnpm, because they're weird enough they need their own, and none for yarn, because who the fuck uses yarn? You'd think since it knew I use pnpm, it would be smarter about that, but it is what it is. Let's see. It's using the default Vite port too. It's really just leaning into Vite. That's cool. And here we have our layout. There's a scroll restoration component so that when you go back and forward, it can get scroll back to the right place. Has a scripts component, which is from React Router for scripts of different pages you use and need. And children, which I don't know where these are actually being consumed. No. Export default index, routes home, satisfies route config. Okay, this is routes. I was trying to see if there's like a top level thing where I can see how these things are all being called, because that was one of my favorite things about React Router in the past. If I go to my One App 5 Stacks project, I actually was surprised how much I enjoyed and kind of missed the config-based routing in React Router, because I used that for this part, because this was meant to be the like similar to my Twitch stack piece. And the order of like events was really clear, and I like that. I like having a clear entry point that describes exactly where you go from there. So here we have the create route, which gets the element by ID root. And if we go to the index.html, you see div ID root. So we start on the HTML. We see it loads this script, and it has this div. We go to this script. I think it's entry. Is that what I named it? Yeah. We go to entry. And in entry, we see that it creates a root based on the element ID, and it renders in that strict mode, Apollo provider, because we use GraphQL for this, and then the app router. This doesn't mean next app router. This is the router for this specific app, which I export here after creating it using the create browser router helper from React Router DOM, because this is React Router v6. And then I use that as the prop for the router provider. So there's a very clear path from the index.html over to the entry TSX, over to the router TSX, and now every route has a clear element that it resolves, which is a React component. Apparently, root TSX is the entry. That's what I thought, but where does this get rendered to the HTML? There is no index.html in here. There is no clarity in like how this becomes our app. Like if I name this something else, it just works. And if I change that, it breaks. Why does changing this not break anything? I don't know where this is used or if it's even used. Yeah, this is what I don't like. And to be clear, Next does this a bit too. But Next relies largely on the default exports resolving to that level. But these helpers like error boundary. This isn't something that I think we're using somewhere. This is a thing that we defined here. And by exporting it, it is now magically the error boundary for this whole thing. If it was just the default export here, that would be okay. I would still like to know how it's being bound. This part being a magic export is scary. This being a magic export is scary. I'm assuming it's a magic export. Is this used somewhere else? It is not. This is lowercase links. That's capital links. Yeah. This is also why they have the framework export versus the non-framework export, to be fair. So if I go back to their docs here and go through this recommendation, you'll see here they just do what I showed before, which is mount this in the React DOM.create root call. So if you're like me and you really want for a complex code base with a lot of people contributing in it to have a very clear path from where the HTML starts to where everything else gets handled, you can still do that, which is cool. I can't do this with Next. And I love they gave me the flexibility, but I still feel weird when I first spin this up and have no idea what any of this does. Especially if I'm a seasoned React Router user, this is very different. Let's keep going though, because there's more fun to be had here for sure. They have templates that you can choose from. Let's pick one of these. Okay, I'm going to use the Vercel template because I want the server rendering. Also, pro tip for those who don't know this, PNPX is kind of deprecated. So the trick is PNPM create space React Router. So if there's a create dash command, you can delete the create dash at the start and do the command PNPM create, and it will turn this create space React Router into create dash React dash router. Very useful. I do that all of the time. We'll call this RRV7 SSR. Let's see what's different here. So look at that. It looks like it's generating these types here, so they don't exist yet. Now that I'm running the dev server, they do though. So I can go here, and this is the generated types. It is cool that it puts this as a real directory here that you can see and debug from, instead of it all being magic hidden behind the scenes in a compiler. I do actually really like that. And I don't love that it means your types are wrong until you run the dev server, which means like if I kill this and I make changes, the types are wrong. If I look at this in a browser IDE like StackBlitz, the types are wrong. You have to be running the code in order for your types to update as you do dev. And if you have a change you haven't saved yet, you can't rely on like the VS Code IntelliSense instance to know across files, because it can't, because the file that it's referencing doesn't exist until you save. So it has negatives, but it's very transparent about what it is doing, which is something I personally think is really important. Cool. This all looks the same so far. So how does the server rendering part work? Let's just run this first. It's on localhost 3000. Hello from Vercel. But is this SSR'd? Let's take a look at the network request to see. Localhost. That looks SSR'd to me. Yep. Look at that. Oh, it's even streaming in updates. Look at that. Window, React, router, context, stream controller, close. Huge. Huge. I didn't know if they'd have that working already. That's actually really cool to see. But this is the HTML that React Router sent to the browser. And as a result, you're not going to get an empty HTML that then you have to wait to get the rest from once the client loads. You can get the whole thing, and you can even stream down parts later. I want to play with that, though. How can I... Oh, context value from Vercel. Loader. Where is that value coming from, though? Server app TS. Can get load context be async? Okay, we're going to close and reopen. Paste, enter. One. Okay, you have to wait the whole second. So that by default isn't sending down as a promise. So here's what we're going to do instead. Tell it that it's a promise now. Now we get an error here because the types all get hoisted. Dope. And that now expects the promise. How do they recommend doing this? Let me look at their docs. Aha. Here's what I was looking for. Oh, wait. Okay, it's not doing what I expected to. It's still waiting for the promise to be resolved because the whole page takes a second to load still. How do I get it to not do that? Oh, it has to be wrapped in suspense. Okay, that's my L. Hopefully, once and for all. Yeah, there we go. That's actually really cool. If you don't know why this is so cool, you need to watch more of my videos. It's important when you're building an app that has parts that are slower than other parts, that you can get the fast parts to the user fast, and the slow parts can come in when they're ready. What I'm doing here that's really cool is I'm taking some data. It's fake data from this fake timeout that I made that takes longer to respond than other things on the page. Everything else in this case is static. This is all just being served through a basic Express server, by the way. This isn't some crazy magic going on with their implementation of all of this. This is React Router, the React Router Express request handler, and Express, all being used the basic, boring way. And now I can set a load context, which is data that I want to have access to in the components, in this case, in every route, as far as I know. And now that I've created this get load context, for the route component, in this case for home, we get loader data from the component props. And this loader data comes from the loader function, which has the context, which in this case is this value from Vercel. If I wanted, the way that you'd probably actually want to do this is this wouldn't be part of your get load context. This is a thing that you would have in your loader here. So I can paste that there now. Message is loader data.message, and it's pretty clearly defined as it returns a string. There we go. Now that I've moved this here, it doesn't really matter what I do here. I can just probably even delete the whole get load context and be fine. Now for the loader for this route, we have this data that takes a second to load. I could even bump this, make it 5 seconds to load. This data is for this route, so there are things in this route we want to use it for. At this point in time, though, it is still a promise. You see that? The promise string. So we're not passing welcome a string. We're passing it a promise that is being resolved by the server. That promise gets passed to our welcome component, which is a client component. This runs on the user's device. This component runs the first time on the server, but since it sees that this promise is a promise, when it gets to the suspense boundary above it, and it sees, oh, I have to await things in here, it puts this in the HTML that it sends to the user. In the background, it waits for this promise, and when the promise has resolved, it takes whatever you generate here as a result and streams that down as part of the same request, which is huge. Because now the server can generate HTML for all the parts that don't have a suspense boundary on them instantly, get that response to the user way quicker, and the rest comes in when it's ready. This lets you have the static parts be as fast as they can be, and the slow parts be as slow as they need to be. This is the whole dynamic static war that we've been fighting in the React world now for like 8 to 10 years. It's awesome to see this come to React Router. Previously, you had to use Remix or Next for these patterns. Now they are way more accessible. As long as you're willing to serve your React app through Express, you can set this up in your code base right now, which is really, really cool. These features were nowhere near this accessible before. There are catches, though. Here is what I would consider one of the biggest catches in comparison to something like Next.js and server components. Added a console log here. Very, very important. This console log exists in this home component. Where do you think this console log will run? Think about it. Come to an answer. Have it in your head. Let's see if your guess was correct. Here it is, logging on the client. And here it is again, logging on the server. This part is traditional SSR. This code runs on the server and the client because this component exists on the server and the client. What about this loader, though? Now, if we load this again, the loader ran here, and it didn't run on the client. This is a thing that I didn't realize how much I hated until server components. This file has parts that only run on the server, as well as parts that run on both. That feels weird. I like the idea of different files being client-side or server-side. To be fair, client-side files run on both and server-side files only run on the server. But the idea of a file that is code that runs on client and server, as well as code that only runs on server, it leads to weird things. Like when you import a server-only dependency, like let's say you import Prisma or Drizzle or some type of ORM to get data, you now have to rely on the tree shaking in the compiler to correctly identify that the backend dependencies you imported here are only for the backend. Thankfully, these tools and these compilers have gotten really good at this, and I haven't ran into too many times this was a problem. But the mental model of not worrying about it is really nice, and it feels weird coming back to a loader pattern like this. And to be clear, Next had this problem even worse with page components and get server-side props. It was the worst implementation of these patterns by a lot. This is way better than that was, but I still feel myself missing the server-only file nature of server components. I want to fix this weird bug I'm getting now, though. It said it was timing out. If I bump the time down, will it still time out? Okay, it doesn't. So it has a default timeout. If you have 5 seconds, it gives up. Is that a thing that's configured somewhere? Does it give me a hint on how to get around that anywhere? Let me just check the docs, I suppose. I leave an open issue. Server timeout after 5 seconds. How did I guess the number? You should export const stream timeout from your entry.server.tsx. While not in the main docs, it is in the API reference. Do I still have access to the entry.server.tsx? Is that a file that still exists? It does not. Okay, so how do I do that here then? MPX React Router reveal. Okay. Oh. It's hiding files from me. That makes sense. Quick context. There's a pattern that was pioneered by Create React App, which was to take the things that were usually generic and the same for like 80% of cases, put those into a different part of the NPM package that you would never have to see. But the moment you need to configure them, you'd have to run the npm eject command that would take all those files and dump them in your code base and make them your problem. That meant you could no longer do version upgrades because you had to deal with all the diffs between your code and their code, and you couldn't just npm install the latest version. It is what it is. It also means a lot of the code in your code base isn't your code. It's the code from your dependency that it dumped into your code base. We've largely moved away from this pattern of ejecting because the frameworks do more of the things correctly, and it sucked. But that doesn't mean we have fully escaped. And a lot of why the things, remember at the beginning I was saying, like, I want to follow top to bottom of how this is happening. The reason I couldn't is they're hiding a bunch of the files. To be clear, I think this is probably the right call because most people should never need to touch any of these things. But when you have a default like abort delay, suddenly I have to care. And for the docs to not include that or the path for it and to have somebody in my chat show me the thing to solve it, that's a little scary. These will all be resolved problems in the near future, I am sure. But in the moment, that was unexpected and a little bit painful. But now that I bumped that to a 7-second timeout, my 5-second timeout will resolve without a giant scary error. Or not. The fuck? Okay, so this abort delay is just not used. So, okay, this is where my skepticism starts. The point of ejecting is that we now have the actual code that is running, and theoretically we should have just removed the magic instead of having this. Why are there still magic exports now that I've ejected? So all I had to do was remove the magic by getting React Router to give me back my entry server file, and then go back to magic with this magic export that I can't actually see what it does or how it's used. I don't like that. I don't want to die on this hill alone, so I'm going to hop into chat and show that other people feel similar. It is what it is. To be clear, I can't imagine many people are going to even be using the streaming stuff, much less using it in a way where it takes longer than 5 seconds. But the fact that I had to go through that to do that is a bit scary, and I hope they make good changes. Apparently, abort delay, which is the other thing here, is deprecate. God damn it. I sympathize with the React Router and Remix teams. I genuinely do. A lift like this is monumental. And the amount of work that they had to put in to make all of this possible, especially when you consider all of the different paths they have to support. They have to support people who are on a React Router v4 app that they've slowly upgraded for the past 5 years. They have to support people who are on Remix v2 that need a happy path to escape and build the new stuff. These are people who are starting from scratch with Vite and deploying to Vercel and Cloudflare Pages sometimes. They have a lot of different paths and features and functionality and people they have to support, more than almost any other project. For context, somewhere around 50% of React apps are using React Router. There's been a pretty big spike in Next.js apps, especially recently, it seems, that's allowed this number to drift a bit. But to support half of React apps means you have to do a lot of weird maintenance crap, and they have done the majority of the work. I am blown away at how smooth the path is for most people to upgrade here and to start getting these benefits and features. But as I just showed here, not everything is smooth yet. That doesn't mean you shouldn't upgrade today. If you're on an older version of React Router, I really think you need to upgrade. Don't let the things I just ran into make you hesitate in the slightest, because the things I just ran into are all new features and functionality that I'm excited about on the server-side aspect of what React Router now enables. If you have an existing client-side React app using React Router, do the upgrade. It will enable so many awesome things in the future. It will fix some weird bugs and features and problems that have existed in the past, and it sets you up for more success long-term with that code base. You no longer need to feel that obligation to rewrite everything with Next or SvelteKit or whatever else. React Router is here to stay, and I am genuinely really hyped about this release, even if some of the features were a bit weird to stumble around just now. Let me know what you think. Until next time, maintain those old apps.